Hello, I'm Helen Morgans-Wenhold from the BDA Scotland. I'm very pleased to welcome you here to this discussion. But first of all, I'd like to thank the Scottish Government, in particular the Equality and Human Rights Unit, who have sponsored and supported this discussion and our work in relation to this. They've also established a BSL helpline. In conjunction with us, and this allows you to contact us to find out any information in relation to council services and also health support. And so that's why I'm here. Today, we're going to be talking about fire and smoke alarms, because there is a new law coming into effect in February 2020, and I'm sure you all have questions about it. So we're here to talk more about that and to give you some information and to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Now, we want to look at what this new law means for us. And so we've invited a representative of the Scottish Government, Simon Roberts, who's going to join us now. Hello, thank you very much for coming to talk to us about the fire and smoke alarms and the new law that's going to come into force this year.
Hello.
Now, could I just say to our audience here today that the Scottish Government does have a video on this, which is accessible in BSL, which is wonderful. But I do think that the deaf community have further questions and points on which they would like some clarification. So that's why we're here today. I know I'm not an expert, obviously, so that's why you're here, Simon, to answer our questions. And I'll pose questions to you that have been posed by the deaf community. If you're watching us today at home, you can type your questions into the chat and we'll pose those to Simon on your behalf. But to begin, Simon, could I ask about this new law? Why do we need a new law? Could you tell us about that, please?
Sure. I think a lot of this goes back to Grenfell, and I'm sure, like many people, that was an event where you won't forget where you were when you saw those pictures on the television.
Yes, these kinds of pictures, yes.
And it was truly horrifying to see a building in modern Britain burn in that way. And you could see as soon as it was happening, there was something very wrong that shouldn't have happened. But one of the things that has come out of that is a concern and awareness of fire as an issue and a wish to address it more effectively. Because the horrible reality is that fire discriminates. It doesn't care about fairness or equalities, and it will target people who are more vulnerable, particularly those who are older. Absolutely. Or have mobility problems.
Yeah.
So we'd had a plan for some time to re-look at housing standards in Scotland generally, because the standards we have go back to the 1960s, and a lot of the language of them actually goes back to Victorian times.
Gosh.
We talk about housing defects as a statutory nuisance, and we empower councils to take action to mitigate the effect of defects on other people. Whereas what we really need is a housing standard that really looks at housing as the right to adequate housing as a human right, and is embedded in the roles, responsibilities and rights of people to have housing that meets their needs for shelter and protection and comfort, and to live a happy life.
Can I interrupt you there, Simon, and
Sure.
just clarify something? You're talking about building standards. Could you tell us what you mean by building standards? What do you mean by that?
There's two things to distinguish here. Building standards, as we call them, are rules that apply to new buildings. So in order to get approval for a new building or to carry out major work to renovate, you need to meet building standards.
I see.
In addition to that, we have housing standards, which apply to all houses and set out a minimum level of things that a house should have, ranging from sort of fundamental principles about structural stability and being weather tight, through to things like safe electricity and lead in water, and now, or soon, fire alarms.
Okay, great. That's very clear, Simon. Thank you. As I said, we've had some contact from deaf people with a number of questions and concerns. So I just want to follow up and make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
Sure.
The new law, which will cover fire and smoke alarms, does it cover what you have to have in your home? And can you talk us through that a little, please?
Yeah. What it does is it defines a standard for a house. So if a house doesn't have the right kind of fire alarms, it will be technically substandard, which then creates a duty on a local authority to, where it's proportionate and reasonable to do so, to intervene, to raise the standards of housing in their area. And it's an existing framework for improving houses, and we're just adding this element to it, so that one of the things that is expected for a house in modern Scotland is that it should have adequate provision for fire and smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors.
So, just on that, could you clarify what carbon monoxide detectors are? What is that? That's a different kind of alarm?
Yeah, a carbon monoxide detector is a separate device which detects the presence of, carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is a gas. It's odorless, it's colorless, but it's poisonous, and it leads to a number of fatalities in the UK every year. It's comparable in seriousness to fire in terms of the harm it causes. It's produced when an appliance that burns a carbon fuel, like oil or coal or natural gas, doesn't complete its combustion properly. The chemistry is that when something burns, ordinarily the carbon in the fuel reacts with the air, and it's carbon and hydrogen in the fuel. They react with the oxygen in the air to produce H2O, water, and carbon dioxide, which is a normal component of air that we breathe. But if there's not enough oxygen, the process can't complete itself properly, and it produces carbon monoxide instead of carbon dioxide. And if that accumulates, it can be poisonous and harmful to people, or it can kill you.
Okay. So, if I've understood this correctly, and if I could give you another example, carbon monoxide could be produced by the exhaust of your car.
Yes.
And if you were in a garage in a closed space with the car running, you'd get a headache and eventually you would collapse. And so effectively, it's the same thing that's happening in your house. But where is the source of the carbon monoxide in your house? Where's that coming from?
Okay. Well, for example, a gas boiler is the most common one. And you'll be aware that the gas boiler has a little flame inside it, and the gas is coming into the boiler, and the flame is where the gas is being ignited and burning, and the energy from that is being used to heat the water in your house.
I see. Okay, yeah.
if it's not properly maintained, there is a risk that the amount of air that's available around the flame isn't sufficient for that to burn properly. So instead of producing carbon dioxide, it produces carbon monoxide, and that's where your risk is.
I see. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay. So a carbon monoxide detector needs to be fitted near your heat source, your boiler or something like that, whereas your fire or smoke alarm needs to be fitted somewhere else. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. For your carbon monoxide, it needs to be near the appliance. So anything like a gas boiler, an open fire, something like that. I should stress, not a gas cooker or hob, because the combustion is intermittent in that, so there's not the same risk. Okay. For a fire alarm, you really should have one in the room you use most often during the daytime, which is usually the living room, and you should have one in the hall and in the landing. And the most important thing is that one of them is placed so that you would hear it in your bedroom if it went off during the night, or, you know, in the case of somebody with hearing difficulties, some other way of being aware of it. And you should also have an alarm in the kitchen, but that should be a heat alarm rather than a smoke alarm because of the risk of false alarms from smoke from cooking.
Okay. So I want to clarify that a little further, if I can. We're talking about 3 different kinds of alarms, or possibly 4. So you've got one in your hallway. You've got one in your, let's say, living room or your study, wherever you spend most of your day.
Yeah.
And then you have another alarm in your kitchen. So we've got 3 alarms so far. Okay. But I'm coming across this term, interlinked alarms.
Okay.
And I wonder if you can talk me through that a little bit, please.
Sure. All we mean by interlinked is that there's a connection of some sort between the alarms, so that if one of them goes off, they all go off. So the usual way this is done is through a radio signal between the alarms, so it can be done in other ways. And the reason for this is that what makes a difference in fire safety is how quickly you're aware of a fire. So we know fires start in living rooms and kitchens, particularly when people are asleep at night. And what makes a difference is if the alarm that goes off outside your bedroom then warns you, that you get out quickly and you avoid the risk of injury from the fire that started somewhere else.
Of course, yes. Okay. So you've got your alarm in the kitchen, and you've got one in the living room, you've got one in the hallway, and let's say a fire breaks out in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And imagine I'm upstairs. Now the alarms, because they're interlinked, will all go off at the same time, and so I'm alerted and can exit the building.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, what about this carbon monoxide alarm? Is that linked into these 3, or does that sit independently? Is that separate?
Yeah. That's independent. Fire will spread through a house, but carbon monoxide it needs to warn you of a particular area where it can accumulate, and you sit and breathe it, and that poisons you. So it's a different kind of risk, and it doesn't need to be connected to the fire alarms.
I see. Okay. Thank you. That's perfectly clear. Now, if you live in, say, a 1-bedroom flat, must you still have the same 3 alarms, or how would it work in that scenario?
You do still need it's possible if it's a very small space that one alarm can pick them up, but the way they're designed is that they produce a sound of 85 decibels, which is designed to be able to wake you up a distance of 3 meters through a closed door. So even a small flat, although during the daytime you could probably hear the alarm anywhere, and you maybe think, oh, you know, I get letters from people saying I can hear my alarm in my garden. Well, yes, but you don't sleep in your garden. It's this connection between them, so that you've got a system that's effective to warn you.
I see. Okay. Now, as a deaf person, how does that work?
Yeah.
Because you've talked about decibels
Yes.
and so on, but are there special alarms for deaf people?
Yeah. Yes. Well, this is an
And
important
again,
point.
do we need the same system with the 3 alarms,
Yeah.
or how does it work for the deaf community?
Yeah. Because we're working with traditional housing standards and they're about the safety of the house, you need to have the standard alarms in place to meet the housing standard. But in order to protect yourself effectively, if you're deaf, you probably need some additional equipment that could warn you by giving a flashing light or a vibration to give you warning. Now, there are devices of this kind. We call them telecarrier devices. And ideally, what you would want in order to make sure you're protected is to have one of these devices connected up to the interlinked alarm. So that if one of those standard alarms goes off, you'll also be warned by a device that's going to be effective for you.
Okay. And will we find information about those particular alarms on the Scottish Government website?
Yes, there's some information, but really the people to talk to are your local health and care partnership who have information about this. They know about how to do it and they're funding to help people.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you. I've spoken to, I've been contacted by a deaf person who said they contacted their local HSPC and the people there didn't know and they couldn't get any advice from them because they weren't aware of the service. Do you have any comment on that?
I'm sorry to hear that. They should be aware, and we've been doing work with the through our colleagues in social care to make sure that there is more information out there and that people in these organisations know and understand where to go, and that, you know, because different organisations are involved in different parts of this, such as the fire service, the health and care partnership, they know how to hand over different responsibilities to each other.
Great. Thank you. Can I just go back a little?
Sure.
Again, we're talking about the alarms. There are 2 different kinds, I believe. There's the battery and mains wired, and I wonder if you could talk us through those 2 options.
Sure. If you buy a new house or build an extension or something like that, you have to have a mains wired alarm. It's connected to the power supply for the house, and that means it's secure. The battery's not going to run out and you're not going to have a problem, an alarm that doesn't work.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. We do know from fire investigations that there have been tragedies where the fire service have gone into a house after a fire and there's been a perfectly functioning battery alarm where the battery has been either removed or expired.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So when we were looking at this, obviously one of the concerns we have is if we said everyone had to have a mains wired alarm, that would be quite expensive because it's not just the cost of the alarm. You would have to use an electrician. You would have the renovation, the decoration that needed to be done. And we looked at the option of saying, well, if it's an existing house, can we offer people the alternative of having a sealed battery alarm? So you can get types of alarms where the battery is built into the alarm, will last as long as the lifetime of the alarm. And you won't have this issue about batteries running out or being removed. And people seem to be in favour of that. And it's obviously a more cost-effective option for people to put in alarms themselves. You don't need an electrician if you're using a sealed alarm. Quite often they come with a bit of double-sided sticky tape on the back, and you can just stick them on the ceiling or on the wall near the ceiling.
Yes, I know that kind of thing. So you can fit those sealed battery units yourself, right?
Yes.
You don't have to bring in a qualified registered electrician for those.
Right. The manufacturers produce videos of how to do it, and a typical video will last 7 minutes. 2 minutes explaining the background, The bit about installing the alarms only lasts 30 seconds. It's that simple.
And would they be accessible in BSL?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check with the manufacturers, but it's certainly something that would be worth having. And quite often the rest of the video is about setting up an app on your phone to control the alarms, so that you don't have to, reach up to the ceiling with a stick if you want to test them or anything like that.
An app? Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Technology is amazing, isn't it? Wow. I'm going to look into that further. An app sounds very interesting. Okay. Can I ask, since we're talking about cost, who is responsible for paying for alarms?
Sure.
And if you're a tenant in a rented accommodation or a private home, does your landlord pay for it, or does the council pay, or who's responsible for covering these costs?
If it's a rented home, the landlord is responsible. It's been a duty for private landlords to do this since 2013, though I know quite often when we're looking at problems with rented accommodation, it comes up
2013. Wow, sorry.
Yeah. For social housing, there's been a requirement to have fire alarms, but not this specific standard. But this will apply to them from the 1st of February.
Okay.
And for homeowners, with the housing standards generally, it's the responsibility of the person who owns the house to make sure that their house is up to standard.
I see. Okay, but you mentioned that the landlord is responsible if I'm a tenant.
Yeah.
If I'm a deaf tenant and I'm renting a property, does the landlord have a responsibility to provide a fire alarm that is suitable for me, or how does that work?
In that situation, you've got your Equality Act rights to ask the landlord to make an adaptation to the property to meet your reasonable needs. Now, they're allowed to take into account costs, but it's not horrendously expensive, and there is help through the Health and Social Care Partnership. So it's a question of looking at, they've got to put in the standard alarms. Ideally, what you want to say is if you put in a standard alarm, make sure it's a kind of alarm that is compatible with a telecare system so that I can get that protection for myself.
Okay. And just for our audience, we'll add some information about that later in the chat that you can follow up on. I'm just trying to cover everything that that people have raised with us. So let's go to a scenario where you're the house owner and perhaps you don't have a great deal of excess money, and you were thinking that you might not be able to afford to install these alarms. Do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
Sure. Firstly, and most importantly, if for whatever reason you're not able to do it, you are not in trouble. There's no criminal penalty, there's no fines, there's nothing like that. The legislation allows reasonable time, which reflects people's circumstances, and there's no penalties attached to this. We have given some money to Care and Repair Scotland and to the fire service to help fit alarms that meet the standard. Now, not everyone will be able to get a free alarm.
Oh, so sorry, can I just interrupt you there, Simon?
Yeah.
Can I just roll back a little on what you've just said there?
Sure.
Care and Repair Scotland, could you clarify what that is, please? What is that service?
Sure. All local authorities have a duty to offer assistance to people, homeowners who need help with their homes. They don't have to give money, but they have to look at what is appropriate in terms of helping owners bring houses up to standard. And a lot of them will use a service called Care and Repair, which might be run by the council themselves or by a housing association, or it might be an independent organisation. In Edinburgh, it's run by Age Scotland. In other places, it's different organisations that run it. And essentially, Care and Repair offer advice and help about getting homes adapted to meet the needs of older and disabled people. And they can help getting from things like grants, where it's things like stair lifts or stuff like that, or they can give advice, and they can do, usually they will do small handyman jobs like, fitting handrails or putting these alarms in for people.
Okay.
And one thing I'd say is, even if you can't get a free alarm, you can get help putting in an alarm, and you'll get it at a better price through them.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. So where do deaf people find information about care and repair? Where do we go? What do we need to know?
There's contact details for all the offices on their website. There are a couple of areas in Scotland where there isn't a service. That's West Lothian, Clackmannanshire, and I believe there is a service in Western Berkshire, but they didn't bid for any of this funding. So in that case, your recourse would be the local authority and their generic power to offer assistance, but it is at their discretion.
Okay. Okay. And if you contact them and they're not sure about what services they provide, can we contact you and you signpost us the appropriate
I'm
place?
happy to act as a gateway to information. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. So if our deaf viewers contact the helpline, then they'll be signposted to the right place. That's great. I'm just looking at my notes and just making sure we've covered everything. We're doing very well so far. We've covered quite a lot. Oh, but there was another question that was raised. If you have the older smoke alarms in your house and you want to fit the new ones, do you remove the old ones first before you fit the new ones? What's necessary? And why I'm asking the question is because a deaf person said, it's really going to look so busy in my house with all of these alarms hanging from the ceiling. I don't really want that look in my home. So do you have any advice in that regard?
I wouldn't remove an alarm unless it was necessary, but I do appreciate the point that there's an aesthetic element there. You may have existing alarms. They might be mains wired or battery operated, but they may not cover the full area that you need to cover. It depends on the make. I would certainly look at, if I buy an additional alarm, could it be connected to an existing system? That's possible, and possibly a preferable solution. It is the case that, and one of the issues that comes out of this, and I think perhaps people don't generally appreciate it, is that no alarm lasts forever. And even if you've got a nice modern house with a mains wired system, that alarm will only last around 10 years. And the sensor inside it will deteriorate over time and become less effective. So you should replace alarms every 10 years. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that makes me think of some deaf people who told us that they'd been to the fire and rescue service and asked for their advice, and the fire and rescue service couldn't really give them appropriate advice. So what's their role in fitting smoke alarms or advising on smoke alarms?
Yeah, the fire service will do two things. Any homeowner can get a free home fire safety visit, where the fire service will come to your home and give you advice about having alarms, about having a plan, thinking about what you would do in the event of a fire. And they really ought to be able to connect you up with other services where appropriate.
Okay.
And the other thing the fire service will do is, if you don't have any alarms, they will give you one. Not necessarily an alarm that's up to the new standard, but any alarm is better than nothing. But if they think someone is particularly vulnerable and they do an assessment about fire risk, looking at things like mobility, lifestyle, do you use medical oxygen, things like that. And they can provide alarms in that situation. The only issue with that is that the type of alarms used by the fire service, the types they've procured, aren't compatible, I don't believe, with telecare systems. So you'd be better off, if you need to have alarms installed, to talk to the care repair service.
Okay. Thank you for that. So the new law, which is coming in February 2022, which is just next month, it seems kind of rather imminent. Is there a possibility of that being postponed because of the circumstances that we all find ourselves in, and or do people need to rush and buy alarms?
Well, I don't think it will be postponed. You would need a parliamentary process for that, and I don't believe there's time to do it. And ministers, I don't believe, are keen to postpone it. Although it's taken time. It's been in law for 3 years now, leading up to this, and obviously there's the other element is the risk that people don't put in alarms and there's a fire and somebody is hurt.
Yes, of course.
But having said that, the legislation includes a clause about reasonableness, and it says that the work should be done within such period as is reasonable in the circumstances of the case. So if you need more time to plan the work, you want to get an electrician in and there's not one available, or as we know is the case, the particular brand of alarm you're looking for relies on an important component, and we know there's the supply chain issues at the present time.
Yes, of course.
You're concerned about having somebody in your house because of COVID, it is reasonable to take longer. It would only ever be an issue if a local authority thought you should have the alarm, then they should intervene. And really, that's unlikely unless they think there's some particular risk or they're coming in for some other reason to your house.
Okay. Great. So you need to kind of show evidence, really, that you've made an effort, or that you are trying, or
you won't need to prove it to anyone, because I wouldn't think, but there is that leeway for genuine circumstances.
Okay.
I know that one other issue people are concerned about is home insurance. So we've been talking to the Association of British Insurers about this, and they put some advice on their website.
I was just about to ask you about this, actually, Simon. So well anticipated, yes. Yeah.
Now, what we can't say is that it makes no difference at all, because people have policies, and the policies could be differently worded. But they say it's unlikely that an insurer would want to know specific details about what kind of alarms you have in your house.
Okay.
And those owners I've spoken to, who have spoken to their insurer, have said to me that the insurance company wasn't concerned about the specific type of alarms, which seems reasonable, because alarms don't stop fires or the damage to property, and that's what's insured.
Yes.
Yeah. And if an alarm goes off, the advice is very much evacuate, call the fire brigade, don't try and tackle it yourself.
Yeah.
Having said that, if you're at all worried about insurance, speak to your insurer, who should be able to give you advice, but it all of a sudden is not going to be a problem. There's a question in the chat.
Okay. I was just about to come to that.
Yeah.
But I did just want to go back a little bit, Simon, to this question of home ownership.
Yeah.
And bringing in a qualified electrician.
Right.
So if people can't afford a qualified electrician, or are we effectively being charged a surcharge because we're deaf in order to get appropriate equipment?
Right.
Is the kind of question that I'm leading to really here.
Yeah. I think there's a practical issue in that there's two separate things here. One is actually getting the standard alarms in, which is the same for everyone, and itself doesn't involve an extra cost, but there is help through care and repair and the cost of it. And the other is the specialist equipment, and the help through that is available through the local health and care partnerships. So there shouldn't be an additional cost to you because you're deaf, but we do need to make sure that these services are connected and working together to get that help for people.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I hope that answers the question in the chat there from Lillian Young. I think we've covered everything that I prepared to ask you, Simon. Your answers have been very thorough. So I'd like to throw that out to the audience and ask if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask you now.
There is one question I do often get asked, which is where can I buy the alarms? Now, I'm not allowed to endorse or recommend particular products or suppliers, but I can tell you that Care and Repair use a brand of alarm called ACO, which I recognise has been a very good quality one. A lot of local authorities will use them or Fire Angel. And there is one website that I found particularly useful, which is SafeLinks, which has a page listing different products that comply with the Scottish regulations. Now, you don't have to use them, but it's a very good resource to say there's a list of alarms and prices that I know will meet the standard, and I can go elsewhere and look for them. But it's a useful place to have, one place where you can look and find what are the different type of alarms I can buy.
Indeed. Thank you. And are we able to share that information? Can we pop that in the chat to share it?
I mean, as long as it's clear I'm not recommending or endorsing a particular brand or supplier, then that information is out there.
Okay. And there's one more question, which is about the situation in care homes.
Right.
And where people are living in kind of independent but sheltered circumstances. Is it the care home's responsibility to provide appropriate alarms for deaf residents?
I'm not 100% sure of that, to be honest. There are separate rules for sheltered housing and care homes, just as there are for non-domestic accommodation. We've had queries about church halls and things like that, but also things we would call non-residential domestic, like bed and breakfast and hotels. And there are additional rules. There's fire safety legislation, which will probably have additional rules in those cases. Another example would be what we call houses in multiple occupation, which quite often would be things like student accommodation, and there will be additional rules set by the local authority in those cases. So this is a rule for house, but there may well be other rules and regulations that apply and require additional standards for different types of housing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. As I say, I think we've covered everything. And if people do have questions, we're happy to signpost those. BDA Scotland, again, just to remind everybody, we have our BSL helpline. So please do contact us on that if you do have any questions. We can signpost your questions to Simon or to other appropriate bodies. We'll pop more information in the chat so that they will come up in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. But other than that, I think our discussion is coming to a close. Thank you so much, Simon, for being here. And I hope that our audience today have been satisfied that all their questions and concerns have been answered by the comments that you've given us. Thank you so much.
I hope that's helpful, and I do appreciate that people who have hearing problems would have additional concerns, and I hope this has done something to help address those.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.